hard to check in on what's going on and where the disc is without losing sight of the person you are guarding. So I encourage a lot of my players to play these parallel hips, and if they want to deny the under, they can just shade in. They don't lose their information. They also don't lose visual of the person they are guarding, and they don't even really lose that much of an advantage in any space, okay? If they feel like they want to challenge a lot of options, they can play even, and if they're more worried about the deep, they can play behind, right? A lot of my cutters cutter defenders, I'm okay with them having slightly shifted hips here to try and encourage a little bit of what I call like a funnel, and that's okay, but you can see they're generally still fairly parallel. The benefit being is that does not put me in a situation where I have to fully commit to anything. If goose goes out first here, I can keep my torso focused on goose, and my hips may turn, but I don't have to engage a full commitment here. I can keep my hips relatively neutral, and they're ready to change direction if he does, right? Which makes that whole change of direction, which is where most cuts are won and lost, more to my advantage than it would be if I was standing here, right? If I'm standing here and he takes off, I almost have to fully commit, which puts me at a disadvantage for that angle change there. The big difference here is how far my hips have to go. If my hips are here and goose goes under, I have to do a full 180-degree turn. Actually, it's more than that because I'm probably turning to open up to the fourth side. So that's a greater, it was probably like a 200-degree turn, 215, not math. Whereas if I'm neutral here and goose takes a step, or if he just goes under here, right, it's a very easy, almost a 45-degree open, right? 45 degrees is the most I have to turn my hips to be able to challenge this cut. And even on a double cut here, right, if he goes out here, right, I don't have to fully commit. I barely have had to turn my hips here, and if he goes again, right, it's a much smaller commitment of a hip turn if I start with neutral hips. The other benefit is it normally lets you see your teammates, where the other offensive players are, and it's a quick head turn to see where the thrower is, right? And a lot of times, if we can be information, we can gain a lot of information, it helps us understand what we have to commit to, which means normally the amount we have to commit to something is lower, which means we're getting back to that maximal coverage, minimal commitment situation. One of the other things we can use, right, which also helps with winning this kind of hip battle, is realizing that depending on where the disc is can also determine with how close we have to be to our person, right? This also, obviously, you can dictate this as a coach. Some teams, Ring, back in the mid-2000s, was a very athletic team, not always a very high game IQ team. So what they would do is they would just play tight, essentially close to you at all times. Everyone would do that, all 7 on the field, and they would run around with you the whole time, right? It's a very physically intensive and high effort style of defense, but if you have great athletes, obviously it's also high pressure. You don't get any help in that situation, so the downside is if you can't win your matchup, you are at an inherent disadvantage on the field there. So what we talk about is ways to deny space to the offense. Throwers are getting talented enough at this point that denying spaces and reducing the amount of available space is kind of a big priority on defense. So as the disc moves, right, our general rule of thumb is if the disc moves away from the person I am guarding, I also move away from that person, right? We call it a cushion. You can call it whatever you want, but cushion is normally the term we use. So if the disc is in the middle, let's say where the discs are here, goose is already in a very threatening space to receive the disc here. The only way I'm going to deny him the disc is by being close. If I'm very far off of goose, a lot of times the thrower can just throw him the disc, so I want to be relatively close. But the disc moves over there to the blue sideline, right, where goose is much farther from it. Instead of me standing here and trying to challenge goose all the way into that space, where most of the time goose, being a fast individual, will just run by me, right, I can go ahead and cushion towards the space that I deem the most threatening, right? How fast you are, also your marking scheme and a couple other things, how much help you have from your other teammates will determine how much of a cushion you can have. But I almost always, if I'm forcing flick, the disc moves to that sideline, want to take some steps off. Because most of the time, the force is flick, and goose is a cutter. Where's goose going to get the disc? Probably probably to the sideline, right? So I might as well go ahead and help myself out by moving towards it, right? And if I can move myself towards it, a lot of times I can open up and gain information in the meantime, and that helps because if I see the disc moving back again, right, that high information value, right, I can reel, R-E-E-L, right, I can reel back to Goose and close down this cushion. That way, by the time the disc moves, I'm back in a space where I can challenge him again, right? And it's just that cushion and reduction of cushion that as well as how we're playing vertically, right, can make defense much easier, especially when your whole team is committing to doing those things.
One of the ways you can articulate to your defenders about how much cushion to provide is like their awareness of the flight time of the disc to the receiver they're trying to guard, right? So in that situation where the disc was here, if Nut is guarding me from there, that's probably too big of a cushion considering the flight time of the disc, right? It's going to be a flat, it could be a very flat throw here, very short time that the disc is traveling in the air. If the disc is all the way on that sideline, however, this travel time and his reaction time, which is inherently involved with one another, is substantially longer, right? So that's one of the ways that you can help your kids, your athletes know when this is acceptable or when it's unacceptable.
Questions about defensive things? Same rule applies downfield as with everything else. Whatever you're doing downfield, your whole team should know it. You should also have a reason why you're doing it. You should also have the other aspects, your marks and how you're playing on handlers, be complementary to those things, right? If you want to have flat marks up front, then maybe you can shade to take the underneath throws, right? That way, one, the marks are making deep throws hard. Complementing that, downfield defenders are making short throws hard. Just like you might want to run angled marks so teams can't go laterally. Maybe you can play under as well if you feel really good about your athletic advantage in the deep space. There are a number of combinations that you'll find to be successful, all of which are inherently dependent on the skills that your team have and how well of a job we do as coaches making those pieces complementary and distributing that information to our teams. So, any other questions? If you have leftover questions, feel free to stick around and ask one-on-one. Outside of that, I think that's all of our time, probably more.
We're gonna get a group picture.